another show of the Two Photo Nuts. And once again, I'm in the studio by myself because my partner is not feeling well. But because of the World Wide Web, we have one of my heroes, Macro Master, a hell of a nice guy. We have Don Komarechka with us on the line today. So Don, how you doing?
Well, you've put me up on a pedestal and you've pronounced my name wrong, so we're off to a great start.
Komarechka. Didn't I get it right?
Komarechka.
Komarechka. There's an A-R-E in it. I was close.
I know, those Slavic names are difficult.
Let's do it this way. If you want to look at Don's images, go to doncom.com. That's easy.
Exactly.
That's easy. So you've got a new young one.
I do. She's 16 days old right now, and she's a handful, but we love her. So that kind of takes my my photography time and kind of cuts it down to the minimum now. But I mean, not really, because it just means that I'm sticking around the house a lot more. And so with macro photography, we've got great gardens in our backyard, and so I can pop out for a little bit and shoot to my heart's content of the insects and the flowers and everything that's kind of I call it the universe at our feet. You don't have to go very far to discover an entirely new world.
No, this is true. But yeah, you've been posting a lot on bugs within the garden at this particular time. So I know you've got it beside you. Show us the camera.
So, well, okay, I need to preface this, first of all. The camera that I'm about to show you is not the camera that I use for everything. There's additional bits and pieces of equipment on it to really push the limits of physics to the absolute limits of what you can image optically. And so that would be this. So this is... This is my my Canon MPE 65mm macro lens, which gets about 5 times closer than the average macro lens gets. Over on this side, we have extension tubes and what's effectively a teleconverter for macro lenses to really push things much farther. So, and then we've got a ring flash on the front for a light source and a fairly beefy camera on the back because that's just how I roll. So this is the big guns, and when you're talking about macro photography, you always have a desire to get closer and closer. The closer you get, the more detail there is, and the closer you get, the more challenging it becomes. Because, well, for macro photographers, one thing that you quickly realize is that depth of field almost doesn't exist at all. If you're a landscape photographer and you're shooting at f8, f11, something like that, you're going to have almost everything in focus across the frame. But as a macro photographer finds out, it's hard to get an entire flower in focus at those same settings. So as I step closer and closer, when I'm doing work in the wintertime, especially with snowflakes, or this time of the year, often with water droplets and things, the depth of field becomes a millimeter or less oftentimes. So you've got to get that depth of field exactly where it belongs. And that means you have to take far more shots than you ever thought you would need, because most of them will miss the mark.
Well, this is true, but you do, okay, right now it's a seasonal, I'm not going to say a sport or a hobby. So right now you're shooting a lot of bugs. Wintertime,
that's right.
You're out shooting snowflakes, which is another thing that we can't do in Campbell River. Well, we can. It's a little bit of a drive to go get them. But that's another avenue. So macro photography for you really never stops. You're able to find different subjects that are out there for different parts of the year. Now, I've been watching you post on your Facebook page and your Google Plus quite continuously, and you're doing a lot of bugs at this particular time. So what are you looking for when you're starting out looking for bugs?
Well, interesting insects, of course. I mean, you're not going to find much value photographing a mosquito, or spiders can sometimes be interesting, but you want the dramatic kind of insect. And you might want to have some kind of action or color play in the frame as well. So what makes a dramatic insect? Well, bees are often a go-to subject. They will be easy to find because you just go to the flowers and then the bees are going to be there. So you can even kind of camp out in front of a particular flower if you're just walking around and you notice there's a lot of bee activity going back and forth, and then you can get in on that. it's also an interesting concept too. If you've got an insect that flies, they almost always will not fly when their wings are wet. So if you're having a hard time pinning down that insect to keep it in one place, just have a spray bottle handy. Just mist them up a little bit when they enter a flower, and then they will hang around for 30 seconds to a minute while they shake off their wings, and then you can work with them a little bit better that way. That's actually what I did for a couple of recent images where I was sort of staging things. I was putting things together to kind of build a scene. Right? With macro photography, you are in complete control of the background as well. So, if you've got that perfect flower, but you've got like a dull, dead grass background, well, then stick another flower in the background or stick a different color in the background. It doesn't matter. It's going to be out of focus, but that color can add a lot of contrast and a lot of impact to the overall scene. So you're in control of these things that you aren't typically in control of in many other areas of photography.
Yeah, okay, so you're actually outside taking the pictures.
Oh yeah, I'm outside, I'm in the field. Now, sometimes I do kind of construct things in my studio, but can I share an image here with you, Bob? Is that something that we can do?
Yeah, go ahead, let's go for it.
All right, so if I were to be sharing an image, something like this, if you can see this wonderful bee here, this guy was sprayed with water and then picked up on a little twig and repositioned onto this vibrant blue flower petal. And in the background was placed a daisy-like flower that had very vibrant, purpley pink petals with a yellow center. So I was after a color impact here. I just wanted to just blow out the craziest, most vibrant colors. That was the goal for this particular image. And all of the different ingredients had to be very carefully placed in order to get that to happen. That's not always the case. If I'm going to be, trying to run and gun and trying to get exactly that moment of interest, then we've got this bumblebee that is actively flying into a flower. How do you get the shot? Well, not by taking one shot, not by taking 10, by taking 100 or more images, because the chances that you'll get the focus where you want, the composition where you want, all of the different ingredients where you want them to be, is like playing the lottery. And so thankfully it's free to keep shooting and keep trying to get exactly that shot that you're after, but there's a lot of chaos involved. No matter how well you can understand the ingredients at play here, chaos is paramount. I mean, you can't avoid it. You have to embrace it. It is just one of those ingredients that you cannot work around. You have to work with.
Okay, so let me ask you this. You must be shooting in manual mode.
Yes, but there's a key difference in manual mode. So the camera is in pure manual mode for shots like this. So typically I'm shooting at a lower ISO, around ISO 200 or so. And the aperture, again, probably around f8 to f11 is sort of a sweet spot that I find for macro photography. The depth of field becomes very shallow. But with those settings in play, my shutter speed is at my fastest flash sync speed. So based on your camera, that could be, it ranges anywhere between 1/160th of a second to 1/300th of a second or so. But the key here is the dominant light source, the primary light source is the flash. And the flash is on automatic. So it's on its ETTL or ITTL mode for an image just like this. And as you saw, I'm using a ring flash. So even though the camera's in full manual mode, the flash is still an automatic variable. So I don't really care what those manual exposure settings would create on their own. The flash is going to give me the light that I need to light the scene properly. And with a ring flash, it has a very short throw. It's not going to go and it's not going to hit the background as brightly as it's hitting the foreground. So you get that nice subject separation, right? The background becomes darker, not black, but darker than the foreground. And with a ring flash, you'll see in an image like this, you don't see any shadows. Right? The lighting becomes very, very soft. Whereas if you're in harsh sunlight, you will have harsh shadows that kind of muddy up the image a little bit. They add too much complexity and clutter that you don't need. I like the softer approach for a lot of my macro work. And so that's where we take it here. When I'm shooting out in the field, anyhow, that's sort of the approach at hand. But in the studio, I take a completely different approach. I mean, as far as composition and subject matter and what have you. And I like to pull back the curtains a little bit and show you how an image like this, as far as water droplets are created. Bob, are you familiar with the techniques required to make a macro photograph like this?
I'm a little bit familiar, Don, but let's review how you're doing it.
Okay. So what happens here is we have basically these are water droplets. Okay. So each of these little water droplets, the more spherical it is, the better it acts like a lens. And if I place something in behind it, in this case, there is an African daisy of sorts in behind, then that flower will show up inside the water droplets, just like a lens, just like your camera lens does, just like our eyes do. This is just one lens before all of that process in order to bring that all the way in. So in this case, I've got this seed. This is a seed of a wildflower. Prairie smoke specifically. And most wildflower seeds, when you spray them with water, including dandelion seeds and everything else that's very common, they will create spherical water droplets, and they work perfectly for this. It's suspended just off the surface of water here, so I've got a nice little reflection coming up. But here's the behind-the-scenes image. This is how the setup is done. And so I've got little tools that I find completely just indispensable. I mean, I can't do this kind of work without them. They're called third hand tools, and you can see two of them in this image. One of them is submerged in this bowl of water, and it has two hands, little alligator clips on swivels. And the one in the background that's holding the flower in place has a tweezer-like appendage. Again, these are all fully mobile, and I can position them any which way that I want. So you can see the seed, very simply put, is being held in place by a clamp, and the flower is being placed in behind it. And the camera is going to shoot in, just in the front, and it's shot primarily handheld. I do that for my work in the field, and that just translates to the studio, because you have to have the right angle, where the camera, the droplet, and the flower are all in the same linear path. If the flower is off to the side, then it's not going to show up in the center of these little water droplets here. So that's kind of how those images come to be. And that process can be taken in the field, and I've been doing that more and more lately. For an example here, this is a piece of bluegrass. And bluegrass is also a great component that allows water droplets to adhere to and stay perfectly spherical. This is blue fescue, which you can pick up at most garden stores. And I created this wonderful scene, and then I took an ant from my nearby peonies, and I placed him along this blade of grass just off of the frame, camera right. And so it walked into the scene. And perfect, bam! As soon as it's in exactly the right place, then I snap the image, and here we go. So that ant ends up being part of this composition, and adds a lot of life to it, I think. And I took it a step farther in another recent image here with a weevil and a gazania flower in the background, and a barberry leaf that was also creating these nice spherical droplets. So you get really inventive with this kind of photography. You have no choice, because you are in control of all of these variables, and if you choose not to control them, well then you're not really making anything useful. You're just kind of making a snapshot. Then as soon as you start to say, okay, well maybe I could move this leaf here or this flower here, or take a white umbrella and cover up your subject, not to do anything but diffuse the light from natural sunlight. If you're shooting out in the bright sun, a white umbrella will diffuse it if you're using natural light, or a black umbrella will work very well if you want to use flash. And then, we get into all the winter stuff and the craziness that comes from the various different seasons. But the point is that we have the ability to completely construct something. Whether it be, positioning the camera and the flash in the background and wait for a bee to fly right into the frame. Or we found this really interesting ant colony. And what can we do to create an interesting image there? Well, what if we put a flower nearby? What if the ants start crawling on the flower? There's tons of different ideas for us to start thinking about constructing something worth photographing. A lot of it's almost making temporary sculptures, temporary artwork, that the camera is then the second step to document and photograph and maintain that beauty forevermore.
Very interesting. So let's go back to the flash for a second. Does the flash ever overheat on you?
Yes, I've actually melted the flash head on my camera. Now, That's just because I'm being stupid sometimes. If you're outside in like 35-degree weather and you're firing off full bursts of flash with an extra battery pack attached to it, then the flash will potentially overheat. And the more modern flashes, the Canon 600 series and the newer Ring flashes, they have a thermal limiter in them to prevent them from getting that far. But the older flashes, I'm using a Canon 580EX Mark II flash, and that has no such limiter. So it'll just keep going and going and going until you potentially melt it. If you've got a flash on your camera, like the pop-up flash, there's no risk of that. It's not going to fire at a rapid enough rate for you to ever encounter that. But flash power is important because you're going to need a lot of it. And so the 4 batteries that are in an external flash might not be enough for you. If you're finding that every second or third frame ends up being dark, it's because the flash couldn't keep up with the continuous rate of the camera firing. And there's 2 ways to solve that. One is to add an extra battery pack. I don't have it with me here, but you can see on the side port of most flashes, there's a little plug. And you can plug in an additional battery source to that. I've got one that has 8 extra AA batteries, so I can fire with 12 instead of 4. But if you don't have that, if you don't want to go out and invest your money, just double your ISO. Say if you're shooting at ISO 100, double it to 200. The image quality won't suffer very much for it, but your flash will require to output exactly half the amount of power. So in that case, your flash will be able to keep up a little bit better. And if that's still an issue, then maybe 400. Don't push beyond that, but if you need that little extra relief for your flash, you can do that by increasing your ISO.
No, I understand that. That's just whack the way that is so huge. How do you handle and keep it so steady? It's like, oh my goodness, you don't look that big. You're like me, you're a small little guy. It's like getting those steady shots and your hand holding. What amazes me most than anything else, Don, is your hand holding. I'm doing macro.
Well,
I'm on a small little
trick,
tripod.
Here's the trick. If I'm hand holding, typically at this magnification, the subject is like right about here. It's almost right in front of the lens. Okay, so if that subject is on a surface that, like for example, my snowflakes or anything else, it's on a stable platform, I grip the end of my ring flash with my left hand, with my thumb and my index finger, and then the side of my hand here is actually resting on the surface that my subject is on. So that effectively becomes an anchor point, point of stability like a monopod, maybe even more stable than a monopod. And then if I hold the end of the camera right there stable, I can rotate the camera around the subject being the center of rotation in order to find exactly the right angle that I need. So it's the fact that I can hold the end of the lens and rest my hand on a stable platform that allows me to hand hold a lot of these images.
Well, that amazes me that you're able to handhold this, because I'm not even going to go there. I got to change the subject altogether. So, do you bring these bugs inside? Because my wife has an attitude when I bring the snake in to do macro photography.
Yeah, well, no, I leave them outside for the most part. If you saw the images with the weevil and the ant that were in the staged, those were done on my patio table outside. Potentially, we've got a sunroom here. That's kind of a quarantine zone if I needed to do anything inside away from the wind. For a lot of the images, if you're trying to get the focus where you want, wind can be a problem. Unless it's a perfectly calm day, a flower might just blow a little tiny bit, a fraction of an inch maybe, but that might blow it completely out of the frame depending on your magnification. So if you can somehow find a place that's sheltered from the wind, our sunroom is a great option, then use that, or just choose a very, very calm day. When I'm shooting things in the wintertime, like freezing soap bubbles, you just require the calmest weather possible because you can't do that indoors. It has to be done out in the elements, and zero wind is required in order to get the best results there. So, yeah, outside when possible, wind is your enemy, choose a calm day, and you should be all set.
Yeah, no, because I was out shooting the other day. I did waterfalls, and there was a nice set of yellow daisies growing out the side of the rock in front of the waterfalls, and there was just a little bit of wind, and it was like, no, I just couldn't capture the image that was in my mind.
especially with waterfalls, you're going to be dealing with a slower shutter speed, maybe around 1 second or so. So if that flower is just meandering ever so slightly back and forth, that's not going to be a problem much for a macro photographer. But for a landscape photographer, that's just going to be a blurry mess of yellow, right? You're going to have nothing of value there. So again, for many areas of photography, wind can be a problem. It can be a benefit in other areas too, but talking about macro, you want to avoid it as much as possible.
No, we understand that. Okay, so let's go back to one of my favorites, which is the ant walking across the. Give us an in-depth interview on that one.
All right. So in the case of the ant image, which I've already shown, and you could probably overlay it if you need to, that image is, again, I've got that third hand tool. And so it has two alligator clips. So each of them is holding that blade of grass perfectly straight, almost like a tightrope. And so once that is put in place, then I take my spray bottle and I spray it so that I've got all of the beaded up water droplets. Now, at this point, you have to start working quickly because those water droplets, especially if I'm doing this outside, are going to start evaporating immediately. So they'll start shrinking and shrinking until they've disappeared entirely. So at the ready, I have another tool in the background that is holding onto my flower, and I put that in place. It's not in place beforehand because I don't want the flower to be also covered in water droplets. I want to keep it sort of a simpler, cleaner composition in the refraction. So get the blade of grass ready, spray it, put the flower in place, and then thankfully I was doing this setup right next to my peonies that were 2 feet away. I just took a little twig that was on the ground and picked it up, pointed at the little ant. The ant, just from whatever instincts it decided to work on, climbed up this little twig, and then I just took it and placed it on this blade of grass, and it started walking across that blade of grass. I put it far enough away from the water droplets I wanted to photograph to give me just enough time to pick up the camera, find the right angle, and shoot the image by the time the ant was there.
Awesome.
So now, trial and error, I must say there were a lot of mistakes made in that process. It did not happen immediately and just like, okay, well, that's how it goes. First shot, it works. Ants are not cooperative creatures. So it took like 6 or 7 tries because the ant did not walk exactly where it should have by the time the water droplets were, evaporating, and then I had to reset the whole thing and try again. Macro photography, is a lot about making mistakes. If you're not making mistakes, you're not trying hard enough. You can't do it right the first time. And every time you do it, you're going to learn from whatever mistake you made the last time. And yes, there's still chaos. You're not going to get it perfect no matter how many times you try. You just got to keep going at it. And the harder you work, the luckier you are with this kind of photography.
Valid point. The harder you work with any photography, the more luck you're going to have. I think that was one of the first things somebody said to me. Just go out and shoot, take lots of pictures, and eventually you figure it out. And it's like not the best way to learn. It's, when you're shooting film, that's a horrible way to learn because that's a lot of money.
Oh, yeah, that's a very expensive hobby at that point.
That's exactly.
Not that photography has become any cheaper in the digital era.
No, I just picked up my new Sony yesterday and 2 new lenses, so there was $5,500 out the window. Well, not out the window. It's a tool. If you need the tool, you got the right tools, you're away. You're good. But anyways, as always, we run out of time here so quickly. All the time. I need a longer show. Anyways, I want to thank Don for showing up. As always, it's always a pleasure. I love your work. Again, the great thing about all this is Don is approachable. He's one of the only photographers, besides me, one of the nicest guys you'll ever talk to. If you're on the street, Barrie is where Don lives, Barrie, Ontario. If you're around, stop by, say hello to him. He does offer courses. Unfortunately, he doesn't do it online.
Hey, no, I do. I have one online, Bob. It's my 1 hour critique session. So we can sit down with anybody, and an hour of my time is yours. So if you want to do a portfolio review, if you want to discuss an editing technique or an in-camera technique or anything, that is done online through Google Hangouts or whatever. So it can be recorded and you can watch it back. So anywhere in the world, you can get in touch with me and keep the learning process going.
Yes, I would highly suggest that people do that. Again, his website is
doncom.ca or
easy.
.com, either way.
Yeah, either
DONKOM.ca.
Yes, go visit his site. In fact, we have to run again. I'm over time. Thanks to Shaw. Thanks for the control people in there. We had some technical issues, but we conquered. That was a great thing. See you next time on the Two Photo Nuts.